Good evening. I'm still doing research on this, so consider this more of a sneak peek, but I wanted to share a little bit of a rabbit hole that I have gone down. I recently did that topic on the Livermore Falls in Plymouth, and I kept coming across the same name, J.E. Henry or James Everell Henry. The thing that piqued my interest the most was the line, in the video being that he moved his logging operation to Lincoln, New Hampshire. And I thought, let me just look into that logging operation. Well, I looked into the operation and I have just been blinded with fascination by what I came across. J.E. Henry wasn't just some guy who owned a mill, essentially. He was actually one of the more important timber barons in New Hampshire. He, in kind of all of New England, he shaped the entire industrial landscape of northern New Hampshire and led to the dedication or the creation of the White Mountain National Forest. So without him, the White Mountains may not be a national park, and you probably wouldn't have many of the hiking trails in the White Mountains that you do today. So to just sort of read through some of my notes here, his operation wasn't just about cutting trees, it was about owning timberland. He was building the most extensive network of logging railroads in New England, running logs and mills along the Pemigewasset. And basically he created these temporary industrial cities, and those existed in the White Mountains of this area that's just now considered pure wilderness. This was before those were protected areas. The best example of it was Zeeland, New Hampshire. Zeeland, New Hampshire was a small industrial town. It was a logging company settlement. It was in the township of Carroll, just north of Bretton Woods. It was built around a steam-powered sawmill in the 1880s. And he had built housing, boarding house, company store, and there was even a post office there that ran until like the 1890s. And then he built the Zeeland Valley Railroad, and this was a logging rail line that ran something like 11 miles throughout the forest. So this was a really extensive railroad, especially when you consider the geography and the topography of that area. It was an industrial extraction happening in the heart of the White Mountains. And it seems like Zeeland faded for kind of the exact reason that a lot of these areas fade. The best timber gets cut, fires become a problem because there's no more ecosystem to, prevent a fire. It's all just dried, burned, dead wood in that area. And so the operation moves on. And there was major fire damage in the late 1800s, and there was specifically a huge fire in 1897 that destroyed the mill and the buildings of Zeeland. And so that's when he shifted his operation to Lincoln. So Lincoln at the time was just a real small settlement. There was some tourism, but it hadn't really picked up at that time. And by the early 1980s, he had built a full-scale company town. And by the time he was in his height operating in Lincoln, Lincoln was the second largest town in New Hampshire. I believe second to Manchester. I have to double check that, but it was the second largest in New England. Lincoln, New Hampshire. Did you ever know there was ever a time where it was that big in comparison to the other towns? I certainly did not, and that was because of all the people he was employing and were therefore living there. And the Lincoln era rail system was enormous. It was known as the East Branch and Lincoln Railroad, and it is often described as the largest logging railroad in New England. It had track mileage that was in the dozens of miles. And this is where the money shift happened, because Henry starts moving beyond just making lumber and pulp. Obviously, he was producing lumber and then pulp, which was produced to make paper. But he buys sites like Livermore Falls to increase the pulp production, and he moves his business into more of a paper manufacturing. And that is what he does in the early 1900s, and that's where he makes all of his money. And this is kind of the beginning of where the White Mountains protection comes into play, because people were really criticizing that style of logging. I spoke about it in a video I did years ago on fire towers. There was a common practice known as cut and run, which was essentially they would clear cut huge swaths of forest, and that would make the area really prone to forest fires. And this wasn't just a problem in New England, this was a problem across the United States because of that unregulated cutting style that had basically no conservation in mind. It was just purely industrial, and so they would cut and they would just leave the area, and that left it really prone to fires, which is what kind of led to the demand of fire towers to help be able to spot forest fires, because they were much more common at the time. And clear cutting on this particular scale that he was doing in the White Mountains was leading not only to the fires, but also massive amounts of erosion and just general ecosystem collapses in the White Mountains. And so a series of conservation groups, and this was a growing sort of movement at the time, but he, it got so serious in that area that by the 1940s they had created the White Mountain National Forest. He sold his business, from what I can tell, to another business in the mid to early 1900s, so I think 1920. I don't have exact dates on these, but I know he sold it for $3 million, which equates to about $40 million in today's money. And then, just things went out. So some things I'd like to do. Deeply interested in this topic. I would love to know more about J.E. Henry. I personally am so interested in how much money he was actually worth at the height of his production, not just at the end, because those are the only dollar figures I can find, is that $3 million sell-off, which is impressive, but not crazy impressive. Considering that he had one of the largest logging kind of empires in northern New Hampshire, and he shaped that area. So most, or I don't know if most or all, but a ton of the hiking trails that you see, especially sort of like in the Bretton Woods area, that Zealand, all that, all those hiking trails are all the old rail lines, because there's so much of them and they're already cut. And so that still exists. So a lot of times when you're hiking in the White Mountains, you're hiking along these old logging railroads. And I'm supremely fascinated in it. As far as I know, in Lincoln, there are no remnants to the mill. The last building, from what I can tell, that was left over from his mill operation was torn down in 2009. If you're very familiar with that area, there is a resort. It's not Loon, but there's another big hotel there with a red roof. There's a shopping plaza right next to it. That was where the mill was located. So hoping to do more information, and I'll get back to you when I have more.